So 2 more minutes. I'm waiting on 2 more guests. That's great. Brett.
Hey guys.
Hi, Brett. Welcome. We have about 2 more minutes before we start, or a minute and a half, and we're waiting on one last person.
Sounds good.
Way to go, Brett.
Thanks.
There she is. Wonderful. Welcome, Cece.
Hi, thank you. Hi, guys.
Awesome.
I feel like I've seen or talked to all of you very recently.
Yes. All right. Well, we will get started in about 10 seconds, maybe. All right, we're going to start now, actually. So welcome everyone to our February community conversation. We're here today to discuss Oklahoma's relationship with capital punishment. Our guests this afternoon are Antoinette Jones, a social advocate and rising voice in justice spaces. She's also the sister of Julius Jones and has been a leader in the fight to save her brother, who was wrongly sentenced to Oklahoma's death row for over 20 years. Next, we have Reverend C.C. Jones Davis, the founder and director of the Justice for Julius campaign and coalition. C.C. is also a leader working at the intersections of faith, arts, and social justice. We have Brett Farley, the executive director for the Catholic Conference of Oklahoma and the state coordinator for Oklahoma conservatives, conservatives concerned about the death penalty. And finally, Randy Bowman of counsel for the ACLU of Oklahoma. So thank you all. Thank you to our panel for being here. We really appreciate you having this discussion with us. This is such an important conversation, especially as we talk about wanting our criminal legal system to be just and to reflect the values that we as Oklahomans say we are proud to hold. Now, most of us know that Oklahoma's criminal legal system leads the nation in many negative data points, but what many folks may not know is that among those points is that Oklahoma is ranked first in the nation for prisoner executions per capita since 1977. So Brett, I'm going to let you kick us off and give our viewers some context. Like, what is the history of the death penalty in Oklahoma? When do we start utilizing this practice, and have there been times that the practice has been questioned?
Absolutely. Obviously, just to kind of lay some context, capital punishment goes back to time immemorial. We can trace it all the way back to the beginning of human civilization, but here in the U.S., we've sort of inherited the system from our forebears in England as we formed as a nation. But it's difficult as that formed. We can trace that, I guess, call it the evolution of capital punishment as we get into the pre-Civil War era, and the geographic boundaries and culture starting to kind of take shape between the North and the South, and it's really difficult for us to separate that reality from the growth and I guess I would say the differences in the system of capital punishment between the North and the South. You start to see early on. In the 18th and 19th centuries in the North, the abolition movement really start taking grounding and growing in strength. Whereas in the South, obviously, both prior to the Civil War and then certainly after emancipation, we see the capital punishment programs in Southern states start to sort of be an exponent of what slavery and even lynching was prior to the Civil War and after the Civil War. And that's an unfortunate reality for us here in a southern state. Some people think of Oklahoma as a southwestern state. I do not. I'm proud of our Southern roots with the church on every corner and genteel, slow culture, but we have to grapple with the reality of our Southern heritage and what it means in terms of the linkage between slavery and capital punishment. And so to bring that to our doorstep, Oklahoma has inherited that culture, good and bad. And so from the very outset of our statehood, or even in 1915, we start to see executions in Oklahoma, obviously early on with electrocution and then moving into injection. And so after the Supreme Court reinstituted the death penalty, we resumed the process in 1977. And so from 1915 forward, we've executed 200 people. And then obviously we've got the planned execution of 25 more, handful of which have already been done. So it's not a great history. It's something that we have to contend with. And obviously we're trying to move forward to end it and get on the other side of that era so we can be officially in the post-execution era in Oklahoma.
Yeah, absolutely. Randy, did you have something or were you? Okay, I thought you were saying. Okay, well, I know in terms of, our state questioning the practice, 2015, our former AG, Scott Pruitt, he paused executions for a moment, and I don't know if you all have something to say about that, like why he paused it and what the findings were. And then I know that also in 2017, there was another investigation, right, into our system. Can you all speak about that a little bit?
Well, I'll jump in. I think, yeah, you're right. So Scott rightly recognized, given the botched executions and the process, the way it had gone, it obviously something we couldn't continue. It was an embarrassment to the state, first and foremost, but obviously unconstitutional. It was cruel and inhumane, period. The problem is, as the Death Penalty Review Commission had recognized, we didn't fix the problem at all. So we're still following the same protocol that caused the problems in the first place. So the review commission, Andy Lester and Governor Henry re-echoed that call this last summer, saying, look, we made 45 recommendations for how the process could be fixed, how we could actually do the death penalty in a way that could be considered safe and humane. I think all of us agree that that's not possible, but it could be at least above board. And not a single one of those recommendations has been followed up on. And so, the process that we went through in 2015 to sort of fix this system didn't really result in anything. We're still dealing with these same issues, the same secretive process for injection and the procurement protocol. So we've got a problem here with state leaders just don't have the will, at least at this point, to correct the problems that we saw back in 2015.
Thank you, Brett. Yeah, I know that there was that 2017, and it was a bipartisan commission, right? And it had advocates, it had lawyers, victims, defense lawyer, prosecutors, and that they found that the death penalty in Oklahoma, it was unacceptable. They said it's an unacceptable risk of inconsistent, discriminatory, and inhumane application. And we haven't heeded that yet. I want to address something that, maybe it's a myth, right? And so in the last 2020 special that details, so it's a documentary about Julius, his campaign and his fight for freedom, there's a statement made during the documentary that the prevailing thought at the time was that Bob Massey, the DA at the time of Julius's arrest, wouldn't seek the death penalty if the person didn't deserve it, right? And so I think there's an assumption that, most people think that if someone gets the death penalty, then it's just and it's deserved. But actually, just like you just told us, Brett, Oklahoma has a really disturbing track record when it comes to innocence in this area. Mm-hmm. So, I'm going to throw this to Cece and Brad and whoever else like to chime in, but speak to us about some of the inequities found in our system.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm happy to jump in and just first of all say thank you so much for this invitation, and thank you for having the conversation, because I think that it is so important for us to be having conversations like this in Oklahoma about the death penalty among ourselves and among broader communities. So thank you so much for bringing this to all of us. I can speak to, what we have learned through the life and the story of Julius Jones. And what we did learn was exactly what you mentioned, that Bob Macy was a prosecutor in Oklahoma County, who I believe put something like, and you all correct me where I'm wrong, something like 54 people on death row during his reign as DA, and 33% of those death row convictions were ultimately overturned because of prosecutorial misconduct or actual innocence. And I think that says a whole lot. Harvard Law School did a study around the death penalty around this country some years ago, and what came out of that was that Bob Macy was the second deadliest prosecutor in U.S. history. I think that says a lot about the culture, not just Bob Macy himself, but the culture. What we understand and what I was able to learn again through Julius's story was how disproportionate the executions or death sentences are passed out based upon race in Oklahoma, and not just in Oklahoma. That's something that happens across the country, which is why some states have been abolishing the death penalty, right? That in places like Oklahoma, I know there was a study called Death Penalty and Race that was led by Dr. Susan Sharp, who was a sociologist at OU at the time. And that study showed that an African-American man is 3 times more likely to receive a death sentence in the state of Oklahoma if the victim is white. So we know, what we talk about inequities, we know that that it is a racist practice, scientifically proven, right, by study after study, not just in Oklahoma, but across the country. We know that if you cannot afford proper legal representation, if you are poor in this country, if you are poor in the state of Oklahoma, you are much more likely to not receive a proper defense, therefore much more likely to receive whatever sentence is being handed down, especially if that's a death sentence. And so through Julius's story, we have learned so much about how death sentences are distributed in the state, and really the bloodthirst and the vengeance that is behind it. And I've said it, I'll keep on saying it. It's a racist practice. It's a racist practice. And for me, that is one of the main reasons why, among other reasons, why we need to abolish it in the state of Oklahoma.
Absolutely. It's well said, Cece. And I think just to underscore some of these things, I mean, the statistics are clear. We're all very familiar with the 10 gentlemen that have been exonerated from death row. But there are actually a total of 30 death sentences in Oklahoma that have been reversed. And 4 out of the 5 of those exonerations were due to misconduct by officials. And so, as we said in the press conference yesterday, it is nowhere near a fair system in terms of racial disparity, proper and competent representation from public defenders, and so on. We can go on and on. We're so far from a fair system. It's. I mean, I don't know where to start. So in Oklahoma County and Tulsa County, both have been some of the worst in the country in terms of the number of folks given the death penalty and prosecuted, but just in terms of the broken system and how you can't get a fair shake. Doesn't matter what your race is. It's not fair anyway. But particularly for those of minorities, just you're kind of up against a wall there. You're presumed guilty until innocent, and it's a big problem.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And I think one of the stats is since 1976, 41% of the people Oklahoma has executed have been people of color, the majority being Black men and Native American men. So there's, when you look at the proportion in the population, it's just absurd. Now, speaking about being presumed guilty, right, from the very start, let's talk about Julius's case. Most folks are aware of Julius's case, maybe not the facts, but they have some knowledge, right? And in Oklahoma and throughout the nation, we saw this really strong show of advocacy and support for Julius's death row sentence to be commuted. So I'm going to throw this to Antoinette and to Cece. Talk to us about the process behind the advocacy for Julius. Like, what were the most difficult points, right? What were some of the moments of hope? And what were some of the moments where, like, you saw people switch their support in support of Julius?
So I'll go first. What I will say is when we did have a paid for lawyer, I think his name was Mr. Albert Berry. When I was 13, the most important thing I remember him saying to me was to tell everybody that we knew about Julius's innocence and don't not share why Julius is innocent. And so that was something simple for me at the age of 13 to be able to go out and share with people. But you have people here in the state of Oklahoma that feel if someone has been, convicted of it, then, oh, they must have did it. He got all the way to death row. He must have did it, right? I believe Tom Bates said he didn't believe that someone could get as far as Julius or Richard Glossop and be innocent. And so just from the beginning, I was always told to share Julius's story about his innocence, why he's innocent. There were several disadvantages Julius had when his first lawyer, who was a paid for lawyer, he dropped dead. The state went from wanting 18 months to let's hurry up and get this man in court. Let's go ahead and give him the death penalty. Death penalty has always been on always been on the table for Julius. And that was very hard for me to comprehend. I'm just thinking at 13, they got the wrong person. As soon as my parents get to talk to him and Julius gets to talk, everything will be sorted out. Because I knew where my brother was. But when his first lawyer died, he got a public defender that was not experienced in capital murder cases and was not experienced in murder cases. So that's a disadvantage right there. Someone I think that's part of one of the amendments. You need to have proper due process, right? So also with that, there was a lot of misconduct with the prosecutor side. There was evidence that was not shown. If the jury had received the mugshot that Julius just so happened to have been taken downtown to have to take 9 days before the crime actually happened, I believe if the jury would have seen his mugshot, they would have ruled him out. I really do. That was unfortunate, right? So his defense team never had that mugshot to share with the jury. He also didn't have a juror of peers. And that happens a great deal. I found out just in taking a look at some of the cases in the 90s, a lot of people didn't have juror of peers. That's an unfortunate disadvantage, right? It's a lot to point out as I've gotten older. I wish I would have known those things at the age of 13 to be able to advocate for him better. But starting the process of advocating for him like we did, I was blessed through the foundation of me is through God. I was blessed to have CC Jones Davis to come in. Didn't know what she was doing, but I know she was sent from God to come in and mobilize the community to ask the tough questions. Why is this man on death row? What can we do about it as people of the community? And the first thing I will tell people is to always educate yourself about the law. Always talk to lawyers. They have to, not they have to, but some people are willing to break down the laws for you. What are some of the things that you need to know as a citizen in the state of Oklahoma? The next thing I would tell you is to, like Cece did, mobilize in the state that you are in. Talk to the leaders in your community. State and local levels are always important. Always important to vote. Always important to know who's running, who's in your district, city council, etc. you need to be involved. You can't just say I vote. You need to know why you're voting, why it's important to continue to vote. The third thing of importance was to create a coalition, which is what C.C. Jones Davis did as well. And some of Julius's close friends, they all mobilized, planned, broke down what needed to be talked about, key points. But what I forgot to tell you is the greatest importance of mobilizing and planning is to make sure you talk to the lawyers. Find out what you can and can't say, what can cause things to go disarray, etc. I will pause right there because it's important for people to realize that it doesn't take one person to do this. It takes all of us. And that's something that I often say, and I often appreciate the world for coming to speak to him. And people like Brett, people like Randy, they're on the call. And it takes us all to create a voice that was never heard for over 20 years. And when he did get to talk, they continue to close ways for him to be able to talk.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Thank you, Antoinette.
Yes, ma'am.
I just want to just piggyback. Antoinette has so beautifully kind of described, the challenges that she and her family faced in advocating for Julius in those early years. I think what we were blessed with, what the family was blessed with Julius, and then those of us who cared was blessed with, was that documentary, right? That documentary that came out in 2018 that on ABC that really put together a succinct understanding of who this man is, who he was, and what happened to him. And that became a very important tool that we could use to then educate people in Oklahoma, because I can only imagine how hard it was for Antoinette and her parents to go out to talk about their family member, their loved one, to say he's innocent. Because a lot of people would say, well, of course you're going to say that because you're the family. But ABC and Viola Davis put together this really amazing documentary that made it plain for all of us, right? And we were then blessed to be able to take that as a tool around the state of Oklahoma. You asked the question, what was the hardest part? The hardest part for me has been humanizing a Black man on death row in a state like Oklahoma. Now, when I say like Oklahoma, I'm calling back to what Brett talked about in the beginning, a state that has historically Southern roots, right? And we know what that means. You know what I mean? We know what that means when it comes to race relations in this country. And so to sit at tables with people of influence and power and try to humanize someone that they assume is a monster, someone they assume the courts got right, someone they assume did some horrible, horrible thing to a white person. That's a very, very tough job. And that requires a lot of skill. It requires some finesse. It requires a whole lot of grace. And I cannot say enough how important people like Brett and Randy have been in this fight with me and Antoinette and others, because Brett and Randy, those are the people who helped us even get to a table. You know what I mean? Even get in a door. And so when I say this effort has been this has been a human chain, this has been everybody, this has been everybody. And so I've just been really fortunate and blessed to be a part of it. But that has been the hardest part for me.
Thank you both. Go ahead, Randy.
I'd like to. I thought that what Antoinette and Cece had to say was very important, and I'd just like to add to that I represented folks on the death row for 25 years, and I still go down there and see guys as part of my ACLU work, and what I can affirm is that might not be common knowledge, is that the people that you meet on death row are decent, good people. There is, I like most of the people that I've met down there. I like most of them a lot. And as we were saying before, a lot of them are people of color for the reasons that have been stated, and for very unfortunate reasons that have been stated. But I've been down there visiting, and I know what these people are like. And I don't know, I guess the way I would summarize it is that there's a lot of humanity on death row, a hell of a lot of humanity on death row. So if folk think that, it's a bunch of monsters and stuff down there, that's just not the experience. If other folks went down there, I guarantee you they have the same experience. They would find that these people are very human. They would like them. They would be friends with some of them. So I just wanted to add that. And I'll say too that, if these people that are on death row, when they get relief, they're almost automatically off to a medium facility because the DOC grades them on their behavior in prison, and almost all of them are top level, the highest level they can be, level 4. So immediately, that they're not going to be incarcerated if they can get that death row tag off of them. They're not going to be incarcerated in some kind of high max or a facility like that. They're going to be in conference. They're going to be in conference in a medium facility or maybe eventually lesser. So the DOC knows them, and I'm saying that I know them, and that's what they're like. And so I just wanted to add that in.
Yeah, no, thank you, Randy, and thank you, CC and Antoinette, for sharing. First of all, Randy, that was a myth buster right there, that people on death row are human, right? And so people tend to think, oh, they're monsters or whatnot. And CC, actually, I want to go back to something you said about the documentary, and I think how that helps shift people's perspective, at least in Julius's case, and Oklahomans were watching, and I think that helped change a lot of people's thoughts on it. So data shows that Oklahomans support a capital punishment is shifting, which, thank the Lord, right? Whereas a year ago or so, most Oklahomans were overwhelmingly in favor of it. A poll just came out, and I think, Brett, you were at that press conference, that 77% of Oklahoma voters support pausing execution. So that is really good. And the majority of people are in favor of replacing the death penalty with life sentence. So my question is, and this is really crude to ask, I hate actually asking it, especially when we're talking about the value of life, someone's life, but I think some people are persuaded by numbers. When we're looking at the comparison between someone receiving a life sentence versus someone receiving death, right? What is the cost comparison? And I think Randy,
I don't know. I don't know that. I wonder if Brett or Randy knows.
Yeah, Randy, do you know?
Yes, I think that there's a site called deathpenaltyinfo.org that provides a lot of information for people who are curious about these various aspects of the death penalty. On there, they've tracked and they found that just taking Texas and Oklahoma statistics, I think this is true pretty much across the country, that it costs about 3 times or more to go through the process and put somebody to death as it does to give them a life sentence. And so, and then I think they figured out that it cost them $24 million per person to execute people in Florida was another way of looking at that. But obviously, in terms of financial numbers, the death penalty is very expensive. And So I think you can find, study after study, and you can find them summarized on deathpenaltyinfo.org to establish that. But obviously, that's not the only cost of the death penalty, and we'll be talking about some other costs today. But I think you were asking about the financial cost.
I was.
But that to include the cost to the people that are actually having to do the freaking killing. That's a lot, and that's coming out more and more now. And also the kind of cost that has been touched on a little bit here, but the costs of people that are innocent or people that are, you're just not sure, and we had a case of one fella who, two of the key witnesses against him had recanted. So I don't think he did it. We presented that case, and the Pardon and Parole Board recommended a clemency, and we went to Governor Keating, who is, as we know, a Republican governor, and he said, "Okay, we're going to relent. We're not going to execute this guy." And there are currently guys. I mean, of course, there's Julius, and there are currently guys that are in that situation. They're going to be presenting innocence claims or doubts as to guilt or those kinds of things. So that's another non-financial reason not to be doing the death penalty, because obviously that can't be fixed. So
thank you, Randy. Brett, were you going to say something?
Yeah, and those are great stats. I think that's right. I mean, I've seen stats that show in some states the cost to go through the full appeals process for someone on death row can be as much as 20 times the cost of life incarceration. But I think we also can tell the other side of the story, which is something that we indicated in our poll as well, that if you ask Oklahomans, if we had an option to spend that money in another way, what would they want to do with it? Well, obviously they're thinking about, beefing up law enforcement, cleaning up redemption programs, building new redemption programs, all kinds of things that would promote public safety, that would be money better spent than wasting it on the death process, which we know is not foolproof and very much inclined to executing innocent people. So there's just a much better way to spend this money than the way we're doing it. It's a waste. We're pouring it down the drain. So for those that are fiscally minded, that's as good of an argument as any. We're burning money.
Absolutely. And well, Brett, you touched on it, or actually, Randy, excuse me, you touched on it when you talked about the, let's say, collateral repercussions, right? So of executing someone, and I'm thinking specifically about the trauma experienced by those who most people don't really consider, right? The officers involved and those that are overseeing the execution. I don't think there's been a lot of talk about how that impacts them. So can someone share more about that, like what they found, just how it affects everyone that's involved?
Sure. Yeah, I'm sure many folks saw the letter that was made public last week via FOIA request that had nine DOC officials, former officials, signing on to this thing. So that's not a small feat, even just to get that many people to sign on to something. But I'll just read directly from the letter because it says everything. It says, and this is talking about folks that are involved in the death process, whether they're inmates that are officials that are actually performing execution or preparing, or just even in and around the process. The letter says, from our collective decades of work in corrections, we know that the execution process harms corrections officers and the morale of the Department of Corrections. The psychological toll of carrying out a death sentence is well documented. Those of us who have participated in executions experience the trauma firsthand, while others of us witness the toll it took on colleagues. Post-traumatic stress disorder, substance abuse, and even suicide increase among corrections staff following proximity to an execution, even among those who did not participate directly. And a recent story on NPR highlighted the trauma experienced by the correctional officers as a result of the execution process. The risk to correctional staff is heightened when multiple executions are carried out in rapid sequence, which is what we're dealing with right now, of course, with these 25 executions. And it goes on to say that relentless pace of executions means the prison never really returns to normal operations after the emotional and logistical upheaval of an execution, because they're preparing for the next one immediately. Indeed, the reports from the Oklahoma State Penitentiary describe near constant mock executions being conducted within earshot of prisoner cells, staff offices, and visiting rooms, and correctional staff have communicated privately with visiting defense mental health experts about the distress they're experiencing due to the non-stop execution. So these are guys, again, that are going to the extremes of suicide or having suicidal thoughts because of the mental stress that they're undergoing. So it's not just those that are on death row. It's not just the families of those that are on death row. It's everyone involved in this process. And this is not unique to Oklahoma. We've seen reports like this all over the country. We've seen former wardens talking and going on the trail to talk about how we need to end the death penalty for the sake of these staff. It's not healthy at all.
And just to add to that, I just saw an article from a DFC official from Florida that used to be participating in executions, and he says he's absolutely against it for that very reason, for all the pressure of what he has observed and personally experienced, pressure on staff. He said, I'm a conservative, I voted for Trump, all that. And I affirm those principles, but I want to affirm the principle that we shouldn't be killing people because of the effect on people that have to actually do the killing. And there's a lot of them too.
I just wanted to also just add to this that, when we're talking about collateral damage, we're talking about, all the people that, we should not as a society be leaning on to do dirty work on behalf of our culture. Like, we should not be putting people in this terrible position. We really should not. And along with that, we have to consider that when we're talking about collateral damage, it's not just the person we place on death row. It's not just the people that we've lined up to do our dirty work, but it's also families. It's also mothers and fathers and sisters like, Mama Jones and Mr. Jones and Antoinette. Like, these people have done nothing to have been put through the hell that these people have been in, like for over 20 years. If people understood the impact of this, because we think about, okay, our system put somebody on, they did something wrong, we put them on death row, and that's that. No, that's not that. When you put somebody on death row, we're putting a whole family on death row. You're putting their parents on death row, their siblings, their children on death row. These people have to endure the burden, the weight of life and death on a daily basis. Think about Antoinette being a 13-year-old, having a brother on death row. What that does to somebody psychologically. I have a 12-year-old daughter. I cannot imagine the psychological impact, right, and weight of knowing that a whole state, a whole system wants your brother dead. For 20 years, that hanging over your head. Mm-hmm. So I just want to just underscore the collateral damage here. We can't even wrap our minds fully around it. I'm glad we're talking about it in terms of, the staff, because that's such an important piece. I also just want to underscore what family members who have done nothing wrong are enduring in the state of Oklahoma because of the death penalty.
Absolutely right. Thank you. Thank you for bringing out that element too, and just reminding us all of humanity of people, right? And who we're harming. We're harming ourselves. We're harming, everyone that's associated with this. That article, Randy, you mentioned the warden, he brought up something about lethal injection. So I know Oklahoma moved from electrocution to lethal injection, and I think it was 1977 as the method, right? And I think it's kind of a way of maybe in our minds kind of fooling ourselves that it's a more sanitized and humane way to execute somebody if that's even possible. But that warden mentions that he said, unfortunately, I soon realized that while lethal injection executions look more peaceful to the witnesses on the other side of the glass, it's just as traumatizing as electrocution for those of us whose job it is to end a prisoner's life. Can we talk more about this cocktail or the method of our lethal injection method here in Oklahoma? What do we not know about the drugs that are used or this method?
Well, one thing is Brett alluded to, they've had to try to get drugs from various places and compounding pharmacies and so forth and so on. And so there are quality issues with the drugs. And it was actually under the modern method of, quote, modern method of lethal injection that they've had botched executions, including botched executions in Oklahoma. Clayton Lockett, they had some issues getting the IV access and so forth with him. And I think some other issues as well. And he actually woke up during the execution. They were supposed to sedate him, and he was in pain and so forth and so on. And ultimately they'd had enough drugs in him. Well, I think it was actually he had a heart attack. He's on his own. And so that was a disaster, and that caused a long examination. But they've also had situations where they almost messed up. They had the wrong drug on site, and somebody caught it at the very last minute. And even Mr. Eisenbar's execution, which was described as okay, I heard that he gargled and suffered some too. So there are kind of lesser versions of it, but it's not reliable and easy, and it's not smooth, as you might imagine, to kill people. So that's been that's been a huge problem, even with the so-called modern method. Oh, and you wanted me to describe the drugs? Yes, there are 3 drugs that are given. The first one is midazolam, and that's the drug. They have trouble getting a drug that'll really conk you out fully, but so they give this midazolam drug, and that drug is the drug that you use to get a colonoscopy. And so they give that. It's a sedative drug. And then they give a drug to, you have this sedative, emphasis on sedative on board, and they give a drug that is going to paralyze your breathing. And then the other drug is a drug that stops your heart. So I wasn't surprised, unfortunately, to hear that Mr. Eisenberg perhaps experienced some distress in that kind of a situation. But it's a 3-drug protocol, and that's what they do.
Thank you. And does anyone know, is there a current age of eligibility, or a certain age that you have to be to receive the death penalty?
Yes, right now the Supreme Court has said that you have to be 18 at the time of the crime. That's the Roper case. But there are studies out that say that for a couple of reasons that age should be increased. One reason is because the American Psychological Association has passed a resolution saying that it should be increased because the scientific information shows that there's very little difference between the development of the brain at 17 all the way up to 20 or 21. And so the reasons that the Supreme Court stopped it below 18 apply also to this, as you might, it's kind of logical, right? That it applies to this kind of next cohort of folk that are still juvenile or close to being juvenile. And so for the same reasons, the maturity and the development of the brain, the ability to control behavior and so forth and so on. I mean, I don't have kids, but I think people that have kids know about this a little bit. But so for those same reasons, it should be, the age should at least be raised. And that's a resolution that was passed overwhelmingly by the American Psychological Association, APA, they call it. And in addition to that, there's been a look at this issue of people of color being executed, and that is tied also to the age issue, because studies show that that people that are kind of in that juvenile to next to juvenile age, 4 of the 5 of those folks that are sentenced to death are people of color. So you start thinking about the things that cause this issue with people of color being a lot of the folks that I see on death row. And that's one of the things that causes it. There are a bunch of others too that CC referred to, and Antoinette and Brett. But so there's 2 excellent reasons to at least raise the age up to a higher age, 21, 22, whatever it would be. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you, Randy. Brett, do we know how many people are currently on Oklahoma's death row right now?
Yeah, the state shows actually 39 still on death row awaiting execution. Of course, we know that 25 of those have been already listed and a handful already executed. So it's a long list, and we're as the governor has said, he wants us to be a top 10 state in so many areas. Unfortunately, we're on some of the wrong lists in terms of being top 10. Oklahoma County has imposed more death sentences than any other county of our size. And that's how you get that statistic. We've carried out more than 2.5 times the next county, St. Louis County. So it's egregious. And one more note on the protocol itself. For those that are familiar with the Hedura case, the DOC still refuses to release documents on where exactly they're getting these drugs. This is not something where you can't just walk down to Walgreens and go grab this stuff. The pharmaceutical companies that produce these things are not the sort of folk also that want to just hand them over to the state to kill people. No one wants that reputation on their corporate bio, right? So if they're not going down to get these things readily available, where are they getting them? Well, they're not telling us. And that's the whole point of that case. It's a FOIA case. If they don't want to tell us, then what are they hiding? And we know this raising kids. If your kid's not telling you the truth, there's probably something that they don't want you to know, right? And we've seen the history of this. That part of what led up to this 2015 debacle was, and we've seen this in other states as well. Drugs coming in from back alleys in India. You've got these black market pharmaceutical folks that are putting together these concoctions and sending them to the states because it's the only place for them to get them. That should be alarming. There's no quality control. We have no idea what the outcome is going to be. I mean, we have more controls in the marijuana industry in Oklahoma than we do on our death protocol. That's alarming. It's sick, really. And so hopefully the result of that case will be that the DOC has to come clean on where they're getting it. I think rightfully so, there will be a public outcry. So it's got to play its way through, but that's where we're at here. We're injecting chemicals into these folks, and we don't really know where it's coming from and what exactly it is. And that's aside from the fact that there's still a lot of question about whether midazolam is actually effective consistently in putting people to sleep. People wake up out of surgery all the time. This is commonplace. So it's a statistic. It's low, but any number bigger than 0 is too much. And so that's what we're dealing with here.
That's a great point, Brad. And of course, when they put people in a surgery, they give them a lot better drugs than midazolam. I mean, nobody would think of doing surgery on me with midazolam, or I sure hope I don't have a doctor like that, because they give you a serious drug, and as you say, that still people's going to wake up from that.
Mhm.
Yeah, well, thank you for bringing that out, because a lot of people don't know that. I know when I first heard that, I was really just shocked that these are black market drugs, perhaps. Well, I know. So last year we saw 25 men scheduled to be executed over the next 2 years. And I mean, I believe that's largely political, and we know politics plays a role in it. I don't know if someone has something to say on that. Um, that's part one of the question. And part two is, since politics is at play, what can we do with our people power to support a moratorium or anti-death penalty legislation? So I'm going to throw this to CC. Oh, everybody, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, yes, politics are largely at play. And I think that's very, very sad when it comes to dealing with people's lives. We're dealing with human beings here. And I think, but I'll start there, but I think that we are making progress. Yesterday, you all saw at the state capitol, conservative legislators. You saw Representative McDougal lead out with Brett and others a press conference calling upon a moratorium on the death penalty because of the issues, right? Particularly around Glossop, the execution what's that scheduled for? April now. This man has been on the gurney 2 or 3 times. He's had 2 or 3 last meals. Clearly, God does not want this man dead, but the state of Oklahoma has given him a new date. So what you saw yesterday was, I think, a glimpse of the steps in the right direction, right? And that politicians are becoming more courageous to question the system. Politicians are becoming more courageous to hear what the people are saying, to dig into specific situations and cases themselves and say, okay, wait a minute, something is terribly, terribly off here. And they are now beginning slowly to step forward, right? People who, I think even a year ago, 2 years ago, we would have never imagined, I would have never imagined that conservatives would have been leading a press conference at the Capitol yesterday in regard to the death penalty. I'm very, very grateful that is happening. I think in terms of people power, that's the bottom line. People, and that's why forums and conversations like this are so incredibly important, right? Because people are going to have to put the pressure on legislators across districts, across political spectrums and parties to say, hey, we don't want this anymore. I know what we might have said about this Constitution back in 2016 and the death penalty, but right now, after we know what we know, after we've seen what we have seen, we have changed our minds, and we do not want this in the state of Oklahoma anymore. And there's nothing that can cut through politics like people power. We saw that again with Julius Jones, right? It could have been a very, very different outcome for Julius had the people not just Oklahoma, but around the world, literally, not said, no, we're not going to just sit by and watch this happen. And so I think that politics are ultimately dictated by the will of the people. The people are going to have to become a lot more educated when it comes to this issue. The people are going to have to become a lot more empathetic when it comes to this issue. The people are going to have to recognize their power when it comes to this issue, and we're going to have to continue to apply pressure. But I'm very grateful to legislators who are starting to have this conversation and make steps in the right direction.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, Cece. Well said. And unfortunately, politics plays a big role in all of this, as it does in any hot button issue. And that was really the primary motivator in releasing our poll yesterday, was because we wanted to. Obviously, we want Oklahomans to know where we stand, where their fellow Oklahomans stand on the issue. But more importantly, we want to communicate to legislators who have the power to change things for the better in the state, to recognize that this myth that Oklahomans support the death penalty is just that. It is a myth. We had polls done that were kind of congruent with that state question. that ask up or down, yes or no, do you support the death penalty? And that's fine and good, but that's a misleading question, because if you dig in and ask folks, if you give them options and ask them, which one do you prefer? Do you prefer the death penalty, or do you prefer life in prison with or without parole? A vast majority of them choose something other than the death penalty. Only 35% of Oklahomans believe in the death penalty, pure and simple. Obviously, it's not a majority, nowhere near a majority. We knew that was going to be the result, because that's what we've seen in every other poll around the country. Americans in general don't support the death penalty solely. What we see sometimes is, for the most egregious situations, like a Timothy McVeigh, something like that, folks in an emotional way support the death penalty. But when you dig down into the details and you demonstrate to them the inequities and the disparities and the cost issues, that support vanishes very, very quickly. And so that's what our poll has shown. And so we're wanting to demonstrate this to the legislators, that it's okay for you to publicly oppose the death penalty. Nothing's going to happen to you electorally. And they're starting to come out of the woodwork. We've got folks even in leadership in the Republican Party that are coming out telling us, I've got real problems with this. I think maybe I don't support the death penalty anymore. So things are changing very, very quickly. And so we want to give them an excuse to demonstrate there is gravity there. Their colleagues are there with them in opposing the death penalty. And we think once we do that, we're going to get a lot of movement in terms of legislation, actually moving bills forward to get a moratorium in place. And eventually, of course, repealed. We've got to take this thing one step at a time. But I'm dangerously optimistic. We're making a lot more progress than I expected we would this time this year. So there's a lot of good things happening.
Yeah, that is wonderful. Really grateful for that press conference and the poll and the shifting of the tide. You brought up the myths, and so we've been busting a bunch of myths on this webinar already. We've tapped a lot of them. Another one I want to attack is that the death penalty is an effective deterrent to violent crimes. And we just know that that is not true. There's no convincing evidence. I don't know if someone has a little bit on that to speak to that.
Well, Randy cited the Death Penalty Information Center previously. They've got a lot of statistics there, and Eighth Amendment Project's done statistics as well. There are ample studies that have demonstrated there's no correlation between the death penalty and a deterrent. And there's a host of reasons for this. You've got law enforcement that are saying the same thing. But it stands to reason. Most capital crimes are crimes of passion. And when all of us find ourselves in a situation where, we're amped up emotionally or whatever, traffic, for instance, we're not making rational decisions at that point, usually. And so it's not likely that someone's going to find themselves in a situation where they might be homicidal and think, I maybe should rethink this, because after 9 appeals, I might find myself in the death chamber. No one's doing that. 25 years, no one's doing this. So it doesn't even stand up to reason, much less to statistics, that this process can be a deterrent. Now, folks have said, and even Representative McDougall suggested yesterday, if there is a possibility for the death penalty to be a deterrent, you have to do it swiftly. Well, you can't do it swiftly and also maintain a due process. Those two are I guess mutually exclusive. You can't correlate those two in a system of fair justice like ours. If we're in Saudi Arabia, maybe so. Not here in the United States. And so we have to pick one or the other. We have to have a fair system, which means a long appeals process, or we can pursue the process of deterrent. You can't have both. I think I'm going to side with due process and justice. That means we can't have the death penalty.
Thank you. Well said. Go ahead, Randy. We have about 3 minutes. I got one more question. Go ahead.
Just quickly to add to that, I've noticed that we've had the death penalty for a long time, and there are still plenty of murders. So that's another intuitive thing. And just to add to what Brett said about the capacity of the people that are on death row, they typically, you do studies, you find that they've had head trauma, that they have psychological issues, those kinds of things are what exists. So unfortunately, you don't find out a lot of that until later, because the process at the front end is underfunded. And when you find out, it's kind of too late to have told the jury that's already gone. And I'll shut up.
Well, I don't want you to shut up, but I want to give you all this one last opportunity for everyone to share any last words or parting thoughts. Maybe there's folks out there that are still on the fence. What would you say to them?
Well, I'll speak for Oklahoma conservatives concerned. We like to tout ourselves as a conservative red state. The problem is the death penalty just does not align with that profile. It does not promote the sanctity of life. It does not promote justice. It does not promote fiscal accountability. All of these things that we like to tout as principles and values in our state are incongruent with the death penalty. And this was part of my process when I converted on the issue. I mean, this was coming out of college. I was very pro death penalty until I saw this data, and I couldn't remain in that position. And so I would encourage anyone on the fence to look at the data and realize that this is un-Oklahoman, it's un-American.
Antoinette, I know you haven't said anything much, Antoinette, so I'll go after you.
I was gonna let everybody go. Just real quick, we all know there's politics in everything. But I think Adam Luck had something really great to say about the death penalty and him being a past chair on Pardon and Parole Board. And I can't quote it. That's what I was trying to do, is find it, but I can't find it. But he talked about, would you be comfortable with one of your loved ones being on death row? And then he said, would you also agree that you still would be for the death penalty, knowing that you had a loved one on death row? And so he said he talked about how that was part of his process when it came time to voting, because people often don't consider people incarcerated to be human beings. They consider them to be DOC numbers. They consider them to be a case file. So it was really important for us when we were fighting for Julius to humanize him in every aspect, every way. And a lot of the coalition members will often say, well, I didn't see the death penalty as being this cruel, this inhumane. I didn't know of the history of lynchings and how it turned into state sanctioned, executions. And so what I would say to people is to search your heart. Would you be comfortable still agreeing with the death penalty if there was a loved one on death row? Mm-hmm. The last thing I want to say is there is something in the state of Oklahoma, I don't know about every other state, but currently, when my brother was on death row, when Julius was on death row, he had to be on death watch for 35 days. He went a day early. He went a whole day early. And I want people to think about that. If you don't know what death watch is, I implore you to go look up what death watch is, how you have lights on you 24 hours a day, how there are the death chamber is several cells away from you. Like, you see it and you're in these particular, you move down different cells. I'm not for sure how often, but it is inhumane for you to be on death watch. And then for the first time, Julius, he had an option on clemency. He had an option to speak on his behalf for the first time in over 20 something years. But God, I think it was after 11 days, I want to say 11 days he got to speak or something like that. But I want to say, think about the inhumaneness of people that are incarcerated. They are citizens. I want people to remember that they are citizens. They were citizens before they came and had to do time. But I really encourage people to look up what death watch is. I encourage people to understand what death row is, how it's like. I encourage people to vote at your state and local levels. And I want to remind people that there was a great amount of Oklahomans that did not vote for the death penalty. So I want people to remember that. That's why it's important for us to vote and be involved continuously.
Thank you, Antoinette.
I think Antoinette has wrapped it up for me very well. We need to end the death penalty in Oklahoma for a variety of reasons. And namely for me, it is a racial justice issue.
Thanks, Cece. Randy, do you have any?
Just like Antoinette and Cece said, just think of the people on death row as somebody that you would like to meet and know and maybe be a friend to, because that's who they are.
Absolutely. Thank you all. Yeah. And would you be comfortable putting an innocent person to death, right? Thank you so much to our panel. And thank you everyone for tuning in. We're a little bit over, but if you want to learn more about this issue, please actually go and learn more about this issue and get involved. Take the advice of our speakers today. You can check out their websites, the ACLU at acluok.org. You can look at conservatives concerned about the death penalty at conservativesconcerned.org. You can also learn more about Julius's case at justiceforjuliusjones.com. As well, you can check out our website at okjusticereform.org. And if you want to do more, contact us and we'll give you some more websites you can look at, like the Innocence Project or Represent Justice, to learn more about this issue. Appreciate you all and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks for having us.